Hey, this is Empress Zingha. If you haven't seen part 1 of Craftsmen of Our Fate, you can do so now by clicking on the link below. Don't forget to subscribe. And coming up next, part 2. Do you see Barbados as having a culture?
Funny enough, because I did grow up with my dad in the house, but I did not grow up with him as a theatre practitioner. We only started really collaborating on work from about 2008, 2009. And what's funny is that without having that collaboration in the earlier years, we have the same kind of thrust in our work, which is nationalism and cultural heritage. One of the reasons for me is because, I find as a teacher, tertiary level, the things that we hear these young people saying, the things that they don't know about, it tells me that there are certain elements of our cultural heritage that have been lost, or are in the process of being lost, because some of us still retain it. So when we talk about Barbadian culture, I tend to get a little, I don't know what the word is, sad? A little sad. We need to do better. We do have, of course, that wonderful thing called globalization, that more wonderful thing called the World Wide Web and the internet. So there's this constant influx of the outside cultures, and we're not doing enough to push our own. So you've got a generation that's coming up, and they're always hearing the American culture, especially. But I'm not going to blame Americans only. It's European culture that's coming out, music, all those things. We are not pushing enough of our own. So for me, I can tell you that my personal philosophy as an artist, as a teacher, is local first.
Of course. No. I think we're distinctly Barbadian, and the culture has to do with all the things you do, the way you speak. When I teach English classes now, I start off by talking about how we ended up speaking Barbadian dialect, because the Africans came from Africa speaking different languages, and then they had to find a common way in which to communicate, and that common way has to do with pieces or fragments of that language, and the English kind of superimpose on that. So speech is one of the things that's peculiarly Barbadian. And then how we move. Somebody was saying that, I think it was Adonijah was talking and saying that Barbadians move to the rhythm of the tok. Yeah. The language has a peculiar rhythm to it. Also the way we eat, the things we eat, the things that we find more filling than others are fulfilling. I think we get sidetracked, and we've been led to believe that somehow or other we're less than worthy, and as a consequence we say things like we ain't having this or we ain't having that.
Barbados has a culture. Right now, the culture is underground and undercover. This is because the powers that be have not yet held on to the idea that they do not have to hold on to culture for it to thrive. And so in order for us to have the quote-unquote freedom to express ourselves, we remain under the surface of the gaze. And there are spots that it flashes, maybe at Carifesta, maybe at Crop Over, maybe at Nifka, we see glimpses of it, but largely everything happens at a level below the surface. That way we are able to keep our sanity and keep our identity solid until the time comes when we have a government that is, or a people, I should say, our society, that is mature enough to let these expressions have a surface.
Of course. Who's the numbskull that didn't think that we have a culture?
Enough people, they got enough.
No, but look, because they don't understand. Again, that's part of the problem with the education system. We have not taught them what culture is. Culture is the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you eat, the food you eat, how you dress. I mean, so if you listen, here's a test for all y'all who say that Barbados has no culture, right? You go out there and look, and tell me that you can't tell the difference between an American tourist, a British tourist, a European tourist, and a Barbadian. Just if they're standing up or they're walking along the street. But the culture is there clearly That's just silly. I ain't even responding to that. Does Barbados have a culture? Every place has a culture. Yeah, I shouldn't even bother respond to that. That wasn't worth dignifying with an answer. Every place has a culture, man. Come on. That wasn't for you. That was for all the people that think that we ain't got no culture.
Oh yeah, man. Ask what culture be. So if birds and ants got culture, people got God. Then there can't be a people without a culture, right? Some people may decide to start to talk about we have a high culture and a low culture, which to me is really kind of laughable. You know what I mean? People that do things, right? That's them culture. They do all kind of things. That's them culture. I don't see where this thing come about divided into a high culture and a low culture. So if that's the case, then they got high people and low people. They must, yeah. And there you go, you understand? But I ain't really about that.
Do you see a loss of connectivity between Barbados, the arts, and culture?
I see a lot of negotiation and navigation of space between the arts and the culture of Barbados. So in other words, I see people trying in certain ways to reinforce what are almost traditional narratives because I think that's how they will be successful. So commercial entities. And then I see a lot of people taking the time to really go beneath the surface. Again, that whole Brathwaitean thing of the submarine, the unity submarine, to really find aspects of themselves that they can hold on to and have those parts resonate in things that they do.
I would say increasingly no. I would, as evidence of that, I would probably point to Bashment, right? Because to me that is a prime example of what is the people's culture being expressed now through the arts, right? And on that thing, I like Bashment bad, you know? Because there's a creativity to it and a Bajan swing, right? Nobody in the Caribbean can do Bashment. Although Trinidad trying to thing now, right? But nobody in the Caribbean or the West can do Bashment like a Bajan. It's got a swing to it, right? And I can't explain it technically in music, but I kind of drop the way that it is dropped, right? That is unique to Barbados. And that would have been so at one point in time, right? When you had the whole emphasis on the high culture thing, right? That the culture wasn't being expressed through the arts, right? Or certain aspects of the culture, only certain aspects of the culture being expressed through the arts. But I think that Bashment kind of democratized the whole thing, you know, and it become to a level now where everybody can express themselves through the arts, through Bashment.
Yes, and sorry, Daddy, but it's partially his generation's fault.
Why would you say that?
They did well in expressing during that time, but I think that a lot more needed to be done to pass on and to mentor. There was a period of mentorship, so you know people always talk about Earl Warner Writers Workshop, which both Earl and my dad were involved in, and they did mentorship through that. But somewhere along the line, the mentorship stopped, and so that passing on didn't happen as it should have. So there is a loss of connectivity. You know, the reality is that the American and European cultures are sexy, right? They're very sexy. I think everyone kind of, you know, they had a moment when Rihanna, especially when she first went up to the US, and she was still speaking with that Bajan accent as she continues to do, and she was repping Barbados, and everybody felt like, yes, Barbados on the global map. We need to be doing it from here. We don't need to wait for someone to go outside to do it. I'm very happy that Rihanna has, but certainly we need to take more responsibility at home, repping ourselves. And there is that loss of connectivity. We're seeing a lot of people who are more interested in, you know, American work or European work, and I would dare even say regional work that doesn't necessarily speak directly to the Barbadian context. We need to represent ourselves better than we do right now. That's kind of my mandate personally, and it's something that Daddy and I have been working on together for the last few years, talking about our stories, because if we don't tell them, somebody else is going to tell them, and there's no guarantee that they're going to be told authentically. And my students will tell you the big word in my classes is authenticity. So we need to have that connection between the arts, the culture, and the younger people especially. I would personally love to see a lot more interaction with the older and younger generations of artists so that we can have that sharing, because I think both generations can learn from each other.
Yes, to some extent. But you see, I have to be careful when I say that, because am I seeing a loss of connectivity between arts and culture, or am I seeing a loss of connectivity between arts and heritage, which is really what I think we're seeing, because culture is fluid, huh? And culture is influenced by everything, and we have the internet, so we're seeing young people coming up, and they're changing the flavor of what could be considered Barbadian. I think of like 2 Mile Hill, for example. Very Barbadian, but also with an international flavor, or some people would say international with a Barbadian flavor. But that doesn't make it any less legitimate as an artistic, what they're doing as an artistic endeavor, nor does it make it any less important to the culture. Culture changes. What I see really is not so much a disconnect between arts and the culture, but between art and heritage, perhaps. You know, the old-time things, the things we used to do. But there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. That's what art is. Art changes.
So in relation to the films that I see, or the plays that I see, most of the time people are trying to make films or extracts from plays or plays themselves to do with Barbadian ideas, Barbadian identity. They're using a lot of Barbadian scenes. The sea is always figuring in the video, in the film somewhere, some feel, something. So I would say that there is a loss, even if there is some strain away from what is Barbadian. I don't think that that is the norm. I think you may find that more on the radio stations, where you're going to get more foreign artists being played than local artists, and that's an issue. You know, if you want to support Barbadian work, then we need to be hearing it and seeing it, not only going to see the plays or going to see the films, but also on the radio, also on television. And that's where I think we fall down. We don't have enough of that for locals to see, and Barbadians want to see themselves. So a film like Payday, the first Payday, exceedingly popular because people could relate to it. They saw themselves, they saw their friends, and so forth. You know, so I would say that we've lost that connectivity. If anything, I would say that we don't get enough support in the media. You know, not enough support in radio and television to make that more fulfilling, not only for the artists, but for the audiences.
Now, do you think the contemporary artists of Barbados make use of their history? Do you think that they pay homage or respect who has come before them?
There needs to be greater respect for who's come before. I think that a lot of the young people are forgetting. And I'm saying forgetting deliberately because it is not that they don't know, but they don't seem to acknowledge, and then they forget. I don't know what happens somewhere in between. Their memory seems to get lost or something. I do think that there needs to be, as I said before, more sharing, right? We need to see contemporary artists respecting elders more. However, what I will say is that I am seeing a number of artists who are more interested now than before in terms of representing ourselves. So a lot more people now are interested in the Barbadian stories. And that's encouraging. You know, the challenge I have sometimes is if you're writing about a story that happened when you were not alive, clearly you cannot rely on your own knowledge. You can do your research in libraries, archives, where have you, but there's an easy way too, as long as it wasn't too far away. Talk to the elders. Talk to the elders. There's a lot that is not captured in the books that we can learn by just having that conversation. We need more of that intergenerational sharing. And I think that when you see people doing that, there's going to be a very distinct difference in the kind of work that's being produced and called Barbadian theatre. I also think that people are coming to a point where they're no longer afraid of things that were taboo some years before. So you're seeing a lot more of the indigenous folk and lifestyles coming out in these stories as well.
I think people who are immersed in their art will take the time to do the research, and therefore you do see aspects of the resonance of that research in their work. A person calling themselves a contemporary artist has to really delve into what is the aesthetic that they're trying to produce. And so that requires research. So there are people who may be exploring movement or exploring rhythms or exploring music, but I'm not fully embraced the full context of what they're researching. But I think it's a journey, right? So we're seeing people taking on different aspects of the journey. Some people will rely on more commercial context. People rely on things that are traditionally entertaining. And then there are people who will take a risk to actually try to educate and to take the audience on a journey to really think about themselves in a different way. And so contemporary is somebody who is looking for that aesthetic that shifts the narrative from what we know about ourselves to things that we may discover about ourselves that we didn't think about before. So in that regard, I think I would want to say that people who are successful at contemporary art are people who have delved into a lot of research and are able to have that research translate into what they produce.
You can't respect what or who you don't know. That's how I would answer that. And I would say not all, but to a large degree, I don't think that the artists do enough research. That might not be their fault. It might be a case of it never having been brought up to their attention in school, which is really where it should start. Are you aware that most Barbadians can't name 10 Barbadian writers? Can't name 10 Barbadian artists, visual artists? They can name probably 100 Calypsonians. They can name the singers. They can't name 5 dancers, you know? And that's because they've not been taught. But when, as a young adult, when I started to write, I was in Canada. And as soon as I got home from studying, one of the first things I did, there was no Barbadian lit, like history of literature course. And so I actually embarked on that on my own. And I sought out people. So I went and I sat down and I spoke to Kamau. And I had Kamau speak to me about, about the tradition. And then I came out and I shared that through writing, through lectures, through workshops, through Voices Barbados Writers Collective. But I know that the majority of practitioners don't. They don't look back. They don't try to embrace. My take on it is you can't know where you're going until you know where we've been.
Again, I would say so, yes, definitely. And I'm thinking one thing makes me say so immediately, which is Lyric song this year. Lyric had a song this year in which he kind of, not directly, but paid tribute to the Serenada. Is one step forward and a joke for joke thing. So a lot of the fellas are remembering where the music now has come from. But it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And I think you're getting to see more and more collabs between the younger set of artists and the more experienced, older artists. So I don't think that there's a problem in this. There will always be a little bit of disrespect on both sides, unfortunately, because they're the older people that feel that they did everything for so long and so well and have nothing to show for it. And then people come along and say 1 or 2 lines on top of rhythm and carry along enough money. You know what I mean? There will always be that kind of thing. But generally speaking, I don't think there's that problem.
Maybe there needs to be more information out there for people to know what happened between 1960 and 66 and what happened after 1966, what happened in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so on. If we don't teach these things in the schools, or we don't have video of what happened, then a lot of that information is lost, So it really relies on the people who are the teachers, particularly in the schools that are teaching drama. It relies on them to make themselves knowledgeable about what happened before. There seems to be a break. In other words, those who are coming now don't know anything about what kind of work happened in the past, how people were adapting and doing things that were different, and starting new trends.
What is it that you want to be remembered for, or what is it that you as an artist want to leave behind?
Daddy wants to be remembered as being the people's playwright. It's unfortunate in one way because I think his work has been abused. People have taken advantage of his generosity and his willingness to represent the people, and therefore they've used his work without asking permission, and sometimes it's produced and you don't even know that it's being produced somewhere. So there has been that abuse of his work, but the truth is that he wants to be the people's playwright. He is the people's playwright. He wants to be remembered as one of those people in Barbados who established some kind of a foundation for the theatre industry.
One thing would be to continue that whole idea of critiquing work, because to me, if you don't have that, people don't know whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing or whatever. So the critiquing part, I think, is very important. Soto said to me, who are you training to do this work? When you go, who's going to take over? And I thought, geez, I've not been training anybody. So I really need to find somebody who's interested in doing that, who has the kind of, because there's a certain degree of rigor that you have to apply in order to go and see the thing and remember and make a comment that's valid when you go home.
Any way that I would have affect any influence or change in how anybody think or do things, and that has made a permanent shift in the way that they live their lives or think about themselves, I think that would be important. I mean, it's not necessarily that they remember who it is by, but it is important that you see that quantum shift from one way of seeing to another way of seeing, and another way of knowing, and another way of acting. And I think that is important.
Really, I want to be remembered as somebody who had integrity, a woman of integrity. I've always said that. That legacy is really for my daughter. I want her to know you can be honest and be yourself and get through. If I were to die, I would be happy with what I've left, because it's not just my work, but it's the work of, and I recognize this from looking at my computer file the other day, hundreds of other writers. There's so many people, and it's literally hundreds of people, not just here in Barbados, but out, around the world, whom I've helped, even in very small ways, And so for me, that's my legacy, is the work that I've created myself and that I've helped others to create.
Wow. I would like to be remembered artistically, as a person who was prepared to push boundaries and prepared to explore his craft, because I think that music can't be static, You have to be able to engage other elements of it, apart from the genre that you're in. And so I like to be remembered for that. As a person, I like to be remembered as some person who always tried to be fair, and some person who always showed a lot of love, And musically, it would go something like I'm just a soul whose intentions are good. Oh Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood. Yeah.